Now, out of the box, whenever you create a brand new AdonisJS 6 project, there are a list of commands that come with it from the Ace CLI, one of which being make service. This is going to make a new service class and drop that inside of the app services directory. For our package, we're going to do something relatively similar, just with actions. Actions are a lot like services, they're just a lot more pointed in their purpose. They're going to be for one specific purpose rather than a resource of purposes. So for example, if we run node ace make service auth and we run that, it's going to make a file inside of app services auth_service.ts inside of our project. If I were to open this project up real quick, if we take a look at app services auth_service.ts, this one just plops in a blank file. For ours though, we'll be starting with the default class that has a handle method inside of it just to show how we can use stubs to generate out files as needed. So let's go ahead and hide this back away and let's open up our browser real quick. One of the nice things the AdonisJS core team has done for us is provided us with a package starter kit template that we can use to start our packages from. If we scroll down and take a look at the contents of this, it has a bin folder for our tests set up, providers, source, stubs, and the actual tests directory themselves. Just like within the AdonisJS 6 project, the bin directory is where we can set up the different environments. The only environment that we most likely care about in this particular case is our test environment. So that's where we can configure Japa as needed for our package. Providers, just like within our app as well, is where we can hook into lifecycle hooks and register things for our package's use case. Source is where the bulk of the actual logic for our package can go. And then stubs is where we can have stubbed files. These are things like models. Whenever you run node ace make model, it starts you out with a default class. We'll be doing something similar here for our package today. And then of course, tests to actually be able to test your package. If we go ahead and scroll down a little bit further, there's a couple more files here of note. First and foremost, we have a configure.ts. This is where we can define what actions should be performed whenever we run node ace configure our package name inside of somebody else's project. So these are things like configuring a providers file that you need for your package to be able to successfully operate, commands, which we'll be doing here today, middleware, and things of that nature. Cool. So let's scroll on down to the README here. The recommended way that we can pull this package starter kit down is using Giget, and we can use specifically the npx Giget command. If you're not familiar with Giget, it's going to essentially just clone down the repository without any of the backlog of Git history for the repository itself. You've actually used it before if you've created an AdonisJS 6 project. So if we jump back into our terminal here and I scroll back up to where I created this test project, you may notice one of the lines right here in green, downloaded GitHub :AdonisJS Web Starter Kit. That's actually the result of that Giget command running, pulling down specifically the Web Starter Kit from the AdonisJS repository. So we're actually relatively familiar with this command. We're just using a wrapper around it whenever we create a new AdonisJS 6 project. So we'll use this npx Giget command to pull down this particular package starter kit from the AdonisJS organization. I do recommend going through this entire package starter kit, giving it a good read through. There's also a couple of pages that you want to read through on the documentation, one of which is inside of the concepts drop down. If you go down to scaffolding, this covers things like stubs, generators, code mods, and command configuration. Generators are naming convention utilities. So you can pass a string in there and tell it to create something like a controller name, a model file name, and things like that. And then you have code mods. This is an overall code modification utility as a whole. For example, we can use it to generate out a new instance of one of our stubs and plop that into the user's project, or we can use it to alter the user's adonisrc.ts file, both of which we'll be doing here today. So I do recommend going through and reading this page, as well as the ACE commands as a whole, both of which are really good to have a solid understanding of. So let's go ahead and jump back into the starter kit repository and give this Giget command here a copy, and we can hide our browser back away. Scroll down to the bottom here of my terminal, and I'm gonna go back a directory and clear everything out. All right, I'm gonna paste this Giget command in, and let's give our project here a name. So I'm gonna call this AdonisJS-actions. And we'll hit enter there to run Giget, which will pull down the AdonisJS Package Starter Kit into our AdonisJS Actions location. Go ahead and cd into AdonisJS Actions. And then before we open this up, let's go ahead and install the dependencies. So we can npm I there to install all of those. While that's running, I'm going to go ahead and open this up inside of Visual Studio Code, just like so. And the first thing that we're going to want to make alterations to is our package.json file. Now, before I change anything in here, I'm going to wait for our install command there to finish out, which it just did. Cool. All right, so first thing that we're going to want to do is switch our name, because whatever name we provide here inside of our package.json file is what's going to be used out on npm whenever we actually publish this package. It reads from the package.json file for that. So I'm going to call this AdonisJS Actions, and we could do something similar for the description. it too will read from there. So we can say something like adds a make action command to the Ace CLI. Start the default version to 001. And there's a couple other things here that we want to fill out specifically just for NPM here. So you can fill in keywords here if you wish. That could be something like actions or whatever you see fit. The author, we could do something like Tom Gobage and Atticast.com. And that should be it for the bookkeeping stuff specifically for NPM. I gave that a save and it looks like it jostled it around. Yep, there's our authors and our keywords, so it just moved its location. Okay, that was Lint that made those changes in case you were curious. Let's scroll back up to the top here now, and we want to take a look at the files array as well as the exports here. The files array is a list of files and folders that we want NPM to include with our package whenever we actually publish it out. Files and folders not listed here are going to be actually excluded from NPM and excluded from installs of our package. So you want to make sure that everything that your package actually requires is included within the files array here. Now, as for the actual exports object, this allows us to define how modules should be grouped together and made available to import whenever we actually build our package out. So for example, if we try to import something from AdonisJS-actions/types, we're telling it to read that import from build source types.js inside of the build directory of our package. So that's what that's used for. Those are two important items here inside of our package.json that determine what our package actually makes available. Let's go ahead and fill these out so that we don't forget them down the road. Because first and foremost, we know that our package is going to work with commands. So we want to ensure that build/commands is included in our file. We aren't going to be working with sources or providers, so we can go ahead and get rid of that. We will have stubs, so we'll leave that in. And we're also going to need configuration so that we can actually configure our commands into the user's project. So we'll add build/configure.d.ts for the types, as well as build/configure.js for the actual file. All right, so our file should be set up. Now for our exports. We want to be able to import our commands. So we'll do /commands and point this to our /build directory, commands directory, and the main.js file inside of there. Now we also need to generate out that main.js file and create our commands directory as a whole, as currently that's omitted altogether. We can use a package called AdonisJS Kit to actually build out and index any commands that we add to our package. So we'll add that as a script. Just put this down at the bottom. We'll do index commands like so. Run this Adonis Kit command to index build/commands. And we want this to run after our package has been built. So we'll add this as an additional command to run with our post build script. So we can do and npm run index commands like so. So it will run copy templates first, which is going to copy our stubs into the build directory. And then it will index our commands so that we have that main.js file of the overall indexing of the commands that we ultimately add to our package here. Okay, cool. Our package.json file should be all set. Next, let's go ahead and create that commands directory. So we'll do new file here, commands / and we'll add a command called make action.ts. For the most part, we can write this exactly as we would a literal command inside of an AdonisJS 6 project. So we'll do an export default class, make action, extends base command, and import that from AdonisJS Core Ace. Commands will have an async run method inside of them that's actually in charge of running the command. And then we can also have a static command name, which is the actual Ace CLI name for the command. So we'll have that be make action. And by prefixing this with make : that will put this inside of the make section of the Ace CLI list. And we can also define a description. So static description equals create a new action handler class. And you can define options there as well if you need to. We can also declare arguments. So let's say we want to have a name argument, which will be the name of the action that we'll end up generating. And we can define it as an actual argument by decorating it with the args decorator from AdonisJS Core Ace and specifying it as a string by doing .string off of that. And we can even give it a description, name of the action like such. Furthermore, we can have flags too. So declare a feature flag, specify it as optional, and the type of string. And just like with arguments, we can declare this as an actual flag by doing @flags for the decorator, importing that from AdonisJS Core Ace 2. And whenever we hit dot, we have the option to define this as an array, Boolean, number, or a string. We're looking for string here. And we can define this with a description as well. Specify a feature folder to add the action to. And we could even give this an alias as well of f. That alias essentially allows us to be able to do -f or -- feature to then use that feature flag. Cool. Let's go ahead and give that a save to get rid of all of our red squigglies. And now we're ready to fill out our run command. So first and foremost, we're going to need to use a code mod to actually generate out the stub file. So we'll go ahead and create a code mod. Equals await this create code mods, just like so. Then I'm going to go ahead and just quickly normalize our feature flag. So const feature equals this, and we get access to the actual parsed results of our flags by doing dot parsed dot. You can see there you got your args, flags, node args, unknown flags, like such. We want to reach for flags here, and specifically our feature one. Just going to do a quick ternary check here to normalize it. If we have a feature flag, then we want to use our generators, and we can import that from AdonisJS core app and create an entity with it, passing in this parsed flags and our feature flag there. Now, whenever we create an entity, this is going to return back a path of type string and a name of type string. So for example, if we were to pass something in like -- feature equals auth web, we'll be passing auth/web into the create entity call as such right here. And the create entity call then would then take our auth/web, splitting it by that slash and specifying the name as web and the path as auth. If we take that one step further, so maybe we add in a version to the front of it. So version 1/auth/web. Now our create entity call will have the path as version 1/auth and the name would still be web. Just kind of giving you a sense of how the create entity here is going to help us normalize our paths and ultimately the name of our generated action. All right, if we do not have a feature flag, I'm just going to generate out a normalized version of this with name as an empty string and path as an empty string. Then lastly, we want to generate out our stub. So we'll await code mods dot make using stub. We want to access this stub's root, which thankfully the AdonisJS Package Starter Kit starts us with stubs with a main.ts inside of it that exports out the stub's root. The stub's root is the root file path that we want our stubs to be located within, which is our package's stubs directory. So all that we need to do is import stub's root from this file and pass it in to our make using stub as the first argument. So stub's root, go down to specifically the one that's relative to our project and import that one. Then we want to specify the location of the stub that we actually want to use. Currently, we don't have any created. We'll create this here momentarily, but when we do, this will be located in make/action/main.stub. And then thirdly, we can specify any state to pass into that stub that we can then use. And similar to how we're creating an entity for our feature flag, we also want to do the same thing for our action name argument here as a whole. So we'll provide that in as entity, and we can reach for generators.create entity again and pass in this name. And then we also want to pass in our normalized feature. Okay, let's give all that a save. And voila, our command is now ready to go. Next, what we need to do is actually create our make action main.stub file. So we can right click our stubs, new file, make/action/main.stub, and enter there. Now for the actual templating of the stub file, AdonisJS uses Tempura, which is a lot like handlebars. But if you need anything more complex than what we're using here today, be sure to reference, again, this is the concepts, scaffolding, using stubs templating section of the documentation, or Tempura's documentation here, which you can find at github/lukid/tempura. Let's hide that back away and let's get started. So first and foremost, if we just wanted to plop an empty file inside of the user's project for this action that we're making, all that we would need to do is specify an export path inside of our stub. So we'll do 3 curly braces, and inside of it, specify an exports. Just like with Edge.js, 3 curly braces is going to be raw information, and exports is just a global function. Inside of exports, we want to specify a to path, and we can use app.makePath to generate out this path using our entities that we've passed into the state of this stub. First and foremost, though, we want all of our actions to be plopped inside of our user's project at app/actions. So we'll specify that as the prefix of our path, app/actions. Then we want our features to come next. So we'll do feature.path and then feature.name. Remember, we've normalized these to empty strings if a feature is not provided. So if they're empty strings at all, the app make path will just omit them altogether. So we don't need to worry about that there. Then let's take care of our entity path. And then finally, we need the actual class name. Now, we don't just want to provide in the entity name, we want to normalize it to an actual file name. So we'll leave that blank here momentarily, And let's declare a couple local variables here inside of our stub. So we'll do var class name, which will be the actual name of the exported class that will end up stubbing inside of this file. This will set equal to, and we'll use the string helper dot Pascal case and provide in our entity's name there. So we're just transitioning our entity name into a normalized Pascal case and calling that class name as the variable name. Then we'll have another variable that is our file name. For this, we'll use the string builder. So we'll use this as a method rather than calling it as an object, and pass in our class name, switch this to snake case, and specify that we want the extension to be .ts. Then we can build that out by calling toString, just like so. Cool. So now we have the actual file name that we want to generate the stub with. So we'll add that in as the last argument to our make path. File name, just like so. Lastly, we need the contents of the stubbed file. So we can export default class, plop the generated out class name in there, and then have the class contents as static, async, plop a handle method in with maybe something like do stuff there. Furthermore, if we wanted to, we could have additional content. So we could do type params equals just an empty type and specify that we want our handle method to be able to accept in those params. Give that a save. And now our stub file is all ready to go. We've assigned where we want it to go to, normalized its names and file names, and the actual content of the generated file. The last thing that we need to do is configure our make action command into the user's project. So inside of our configure.ts, let's get rid of that underscore that's just there because the variable is unused, but we're going to use it here momentarily. First and foremost, we're going to need code mods again. So let's create a new code mods, set that equal to await. We can use that command dot create code mods just like so. And we'll await code mods dot, and we can use this code mods to update the user's RC file. This accepts in a callback that returns us back an RC file helper that will allow us to do RC file and add a command to the RC files command list. Here we want to specify the import path of our commands, which is going to be the actual package name. So if we go into our package.json, scroll up, we want to look at the name. So it's going to be AdonisJS -actions / the export path of our commands. So /commands right here as we have defined in our export. So AdonisJS -actions / commands, just like such. Awesome. So let's go ahead and jump back into our terminal now. And we're still inside of our AdonisJS Actions project. So I'm just going to clear out our terminal and let's run npm run build to actually build this package out. See it run through a couple of things here. And if all went well, you shouldn't see any errors. Furthermore, we can see all of the steps. So it cleared out our build directory if it was there, converted it from TypeScript to JavaScript, the copy templates, copied our files from our stubs to the build, and then it also ran AdonisKit index build commands. The AdonisKit generated out an artifact for our build commands that generated a commands.json, a main.js, and a main.t.ts for our command types. If we take a look at our build directory, we'll see all of this reflected. We have our index, our configure, we have our stubs, we also have our commands, as well as the main.js file and the command.js that the AdonisKit command index generated for us. Awesome, so everything there is looking a-okay. Before we run through how we can actually test this out locally, let's create a test inside of our project. So inside of tests, let's right click that, new file, create a commands folder, and create a spec for make action spec.ts. Let's do a test group called make action that accepts in the group, and then we'll have a test that should allow us to make an action, async, and we'll accept in assert. Now, a couple of things here. First, I was typing and I didn't import anything, so I'm going to go ahead and run those imports here. So import test, that looks better now. Next, we need to actually use the file system. So we need to jump into our bin and account for that here too. And I don't believe that comes pre-installed, so let's actually jump into our terminal and install it real quick. So clear that out, npm -d to specify it as a dev dependency at Japa/file system, which will provide us some utilities to be able to easily test with our file system. So there we go, that's installed. And we just want to add that in as a plugin to our configure plugins array. So file system, and it doesn't look like Visual Studio Code's picking that up. So let's go up here, import file system from at Japa file system like such. Okay, cool. With that plugin added, let's jump back into our make action spec. And let's first create an Ace CLI factory. So const ace equals await new ace factory and make that with, and now that we've added that file system plugin, we should have fs available within our test context. And we can use fs.base URL as the app root for our Ace factory. Furthermore, whenever each of our tests run, we want to tear down. So group each tear down async and just delete off of our process.env Adonis_Ace CWD. Just clearing out the generated environment variable from our Ace factory here. All right, then we'll await Ace app and init it. And to allow direct assertion of the Ace result, we'll switch this to raw mode. So Ace UI switch mode to raw. That's going to allow us to assert directly against log statements inside of the Ace CLI. Then we'll want to run our command. So const command equals await Ace create, and let's import our actual make action command from our commands directory and provide in an argument of something like login. Then we'll await command and actually execute that command. Now that our command's executed, we can begin our assertions. So we'll do command.assert log. So we'll assert against the direct raw statement of the log, which is enabled since we've switched to raw mode now. We should get back green done 4 spaces, create app actions login.ts. And this is asserting that we literally see within the terminal a green done statement and create app actions log.ts statement. But we just don't want to go off the statement alone. Instead, we want to also await assert file contains, and we want to do the file path to assert against. So that's our app actions login.ts file. And we want to assert that it contains export default class login. You can put a curly brace there at the end of that too, if you wish, and give that a save. If all went well, we should be able to jump back into our terminal here, clear that out, npm run test, and there we go. So we can see our example test ran and completed successfully. It's able to add 2 numbers, so that's A-okay. And then our make action test suite can now make an action. So you can compound and expand on those tests as you see fit using a similar process. But now let's talk about how we can physically test this inside of another project locally on our machine. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this text editor away, and I'm going to open up a different one that has that test project that we saw and created a service for at the very beginning of this lesson. And let's jump back into our terminal here as well. I'm going to clear this out. While we're still in our AdonisJS Actions project, what we want to do is use npm to create a symbolic link to this project locally. For that, we can run the npm link command. This will create a global symbolic link using the same name that's in our package.json name value. So in our case, it's going to be AdonisJS-actions, which just so happens to match our actual project name. So we'll run that real quick. It will create a symbolic link, and you should see that it added 1 package. With that added, we can now cd over into our test project. I'm going to clear that out, and we can use npm link to specify that we want to install AdonisJS Actions as a dependency inside of this test project. And we'll use the same symbolically linked location on our system to install that. So if we run this, there we go. We can see it added our package. I'm going to go ahead and clear that out. And since npm link isn't the nodeAce add command, it hasn't configured our package inside of the project yet. So we need to do that as well. So nodeAce configure, and the Ace CLI configure command just looks inside of the node modules folder. So we just need to specify the folder name inside of there, which would be the same as our package name, which is AdonisJS Actions. So we'll configure that real quick as well. And we can see that that's now updated our adonisrc.ts file. So if we clear this out and run nodeAce list, look at that. Our make section now contains a make action command that we can use. Furthermore, if we clear this out once more and give it a go, so nodeAce make action, let's create a login action just as we saw in our test. And look at that, it created app actions login.ts. We could do nodeAce make action login -- feature equals auth/web. Run that, and there we go. We can see it created app actions, and it namespaced our action into auth/web/login.ts. Let's go take a look at the files that actually generated out. So let's take a look at app actions. Here's our login.ts file. Oh, you can see we have a dangling space there at the start. That's okay, but everything else here looks correct. Our actual class name is login. And if we take a look at auth, it will look relatively the same. If we jump back into our terminal, let's hit up twice, and let's create a little bit more of a messed up name. So login user from web. So now we've got Pascal case mixed with snake case. Let's run that. And you can see it normalized everything appropriately to snake case for the file name. And if we jump into the actual file that was generated, it normalized everything to Pascal case for the actual class name. Awesome. Now, when it comes time to actually publish this out to npm, you'll want to go to npmjs.com, create yourself a login to be able to use in an organization if you wish. And then once you have credentials on npmjs.com to be able to log into, you can do npm login to specify those to npm and login locally. And then finally, npm publish to actually publish out the version that you have for your project to npm. Now, I'm not actually going to create this package here today on screen because it actually already exists on npm as at atticast.com/actions right here. But that's the gist on how you can make a simple package for AdonisJS 6, use it locally to test it out, create tests for it as well, and then publish it out to npm.